Hi, and welcome to Steve Braith's True Crime Podcast. And joining me tonight is Simone. Good evening, Simone.
Hi, good evening, Steve. Thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Good to have you on. And it's only a couple of months since I had our good friend on, Kevin Lane, and Kevin was on after being released from prison and came on the show to promote his book, which was called "Fitted Up and Fighting Back." Fantastic book, which I read in 4 days and thoroughly enjoyed. And it was great to get Kevin on. He did me the honour of being, one of my early true crime podcast guests, and talking about the and injustice that he's faced over over many years, and essentially fighting to clear his name. And it all seemed to be going very well. He got himself back on his feet. He was, back in work and enjoying life. Certainly wanting to put things right. In his personal life, and just get back to being a free man. And unfortunately, that hasn't been allowed to happen. Tell us what's happened, Simone.
I would love to be able to sit and say Kevin's been doing amazing podcasts. He's had his book launch. His book's been received amazingly well, and he's getting on with life. But unfortunately, as we do this podcast, Kevin is sitting in a prison cell as he's been recalled to prison. It was a complete and utter shock to Kevin, to his friends, to his family, to his loved ones. We went to his probation meeting as normal, and I received a phone call from Kevin's telephone, and I, of course, assumed it was Kevin. And there was a CID on the other end of the phone who was informing me Kevin was being taken into custody. It was quite traumatic, Steve. The CID officer had come to the car to meet me to give me some of Kevin's possessions, and he explained Kevin was extremely calm. He was being walked to the van and he was being taken to the Surrey custody unit. And I mean, I was just absolutely gobsmacked, absolutely shocked. I couldn't think any reasons for his recall. And I mean, just to give you a prime example, there were 10 officers involved in his recall. So there was a massive van, there was a police car, there were 8 police officers and 2 officers driving. Just based on the fact that the CID had told me that Kevin had walked to the car very calmly, why was this all needed? It's such a waste of resources, as is his recall, when it's proven that Kevin can be managed in society absolutely fine. So yeah, he's been recalled, Steve.
What was the reasons given for the recall, Simone?
So it was a breach. There was no criminal offence that had taken place, and it was an invalid breach. It was an unlawful breach, Steve. What had initially happened was Kevin had, when he was released on his initial release, he was released for 4 years, and one of the first ever addresses he gave to his very first probation office at Red Hill was his best friend's address. The address is in Middlesex. It's in Northwood. Anyone from Middlesex would know that Northwood is in Middlesex. So Kevin is on a life license, and part of his life license means that he has an exclusion zone. So Kevin is not allowed in Hertfordshire. So within his life license, Kevin is given a map, and this map categorically outlines the whole of Hertfordshire. So Kevin's best friend lives in Northwood, Middlesex, which is out of Hertfordshire, which has nothing to do with Hertfordshire. And as I had previously stated, this address was given to Kevin's very first probation office. There's never ever been any issues or problems with Kevin going to this address. And so when he's been released from prison in April, he's gone to see his best friend. And he didn't think anything of it. And a couple of days later, Kevin, at his home address, received a letter saying he's received his first official breach. So where Kevin took his licensing conditions extremely seriously, the very first thing he did was speak to his solicitor, and his solicitor immediately sent an email to his probation officer stating what I had just mentioned, that he's allowed to go here. He linked government official websites stating that Northwood is in Middlesex, it's nothing to do with Hertfordshire, and he asked for the breach to be rescinded. Kevin's parole officer never replied to Kevin's email, to Kevin's solicitor's email. And on Kevin's recall meeting, so the day he was recalled on his probation meeting, the probation officer had said to Kevin that by law he doesn't have to answer to Kevin's solicitor's email, which was just an absolute shock to us. Steve, on his previous recall, Kevin had never met his parole officer. And a month before his release in April, Kevin was issued a new parole officer. So when Kevin was eventually released in April, he was given another parole officer. So at this point, he's got two parole officers. He was given the parole officer on his last recall, a new one, and then when he's left prison, he was given another one. So he has his main probation officer, who he has as he's leaving prison. And to complicate matters even worse, they've decided to hand him over to a different probation officer with a new probation manager. So his main probation manager has to hand Kevin over to this new probation officer. So there's already 3 probation officers that have been involved. So while Kevin's been out, he's had to have a tag fitted. So in the first 5 years of his initial release, he never needed a tag. He didn't have any police intelligence on him. He had no issues with any probation officers. However, they felt now he needed a tag. His tag was not fitted for the first 3 days, Steve. So for 3 days, Kevin had no tag fitted. He constantly let his probation officer know there's no tag fitted. He stayed at home, making sure he was following every single rule possible. Kevin attended every single probation meeting half an hour early. We would get up super early so he would be there on time. He never missed one. His main probation officer was only present for 4 out of his 8 meetings. So you've got to imagine he's working with 2 probation managers. They're not both present on both meetings. So, for example, where his solicitor had emailed his main probation officer asking for the breach to be rescinded, his new probation officer had no idea about it. Can you see how confusing it is me just speaking to you about it?
It's so confusing, and you know, for the people listening, they'll be trying to piece it together. But for anybody coming out of prison to be given those kind of rules and regulations, it's an absolute minefield. And he's been lucky enough to have you by his side throughout this. The two of you, I guess, you know, are having to sit and work it all out and make sure that you're following the rules and guidelines to the T. But it's so difficult.
It's not even, do you know what it is, Steve? It's giving Kevin, after serving 20 years in prison, they've released him with absolutely no conditions, if you like. No tag, not 100 probation officers, just the one. And he's done fine. He's done brilliant. He's had businesses. He's had no, as I said, police intelligence. He's done perfectly well. So why this time would he require a tag? Would he require 2 probation officers? It's like they're almost setting him up for failure rather than trying to help him. So Kevin had always had an excellent rapport with his previous probation officers. So in those 4 years he was released, there were no warnings, no concerns, and all of his reports were excellent with minimal reporting. However, Kevin has always felt almost like a canteen culture within Gravesend probation. who are his current probation office, and he feels the canteen culture has done its rounds. There's lots of sort of infactual reporting that's going on, and Kevin is in the process of obtaining material by way of freedom of information and subject access requests to substantiate his claims. So his claims don't go unheard of. He's got proof to back them. I think what happened after he got the initial breach, Kevin was kind of startled, because he was just like, how can they do this to me? How can they breach me for going to address that is outside my exclusion zone? So at that point, Kevin almost leveled up. He took his license a million times more seriously. Not that he wasn't taking it seriously at this point, but he kind of realized, okay, they're out to get me. So one of Kevin's very close friends had passed away. And Kevin was unable to go to the funeral as it was in Somerset. And if Kevin needs to travel, there's loads of procedures and protocols he needs to follow. His life license doesn't allow him to live a normal life. He has to kind of ask 10 days in advance to stay out later than 12 o'clock. Anything overnight needs to be cleared. So it's a whole process. So Kevin, wanting to kind of not go anywhere northward, not go anywhere in Northwood where this family reside, decided to meet them further away. So he went to Pinner, Middlesex. And anyone who knows Pinner, again, will know it's in Middlesex, it's in Harrow, it's absolutely nothing to do with Hertfordshire. So Kevin has gone to pay his respects and condolences to this family. Again, he didn't think anything of it. Kevin's allowed in transit to travel through Hertfordshire. He's not allowed to be in it, though, because that's his exclusion zone. And Kevin takes his license so seriously that he drives the super long way around the motorway, do you know, just to avoid it. So he's nowhere near it.
Yeah.
And Kevin got a second breach. And it's absolutely nothing to do with Hertfordshire. It's completely unfounded, it's unjust, and it's unfair. And when I talk about Kevin having different probation officers, I think a must to also consider is the disjointed approach as to how Kevin was managed. So his main probation officer refused to copy his new probation officer into any email involving Kevin, and he was kind of almost purposely keeping her out of the loop. And this is actually verified within a report he wrote where he states he does not need Kevin's new probation officer to be involved or present when dealing with Kevin. But it makes no sense. If Kevin's being handed over to this new probation officer, surely, Steve, she needs to be kept in the loop on absolutely everything.
You would have thought so. Yeah, you would have thought so. I mean, that's that's exactly what you would expect to happen.
And I mean, what I'm going to tell you next is going to kind of show exactly why everyone needs to be kept in the loop. So at a probation meeting, only Kevin's new probation officer was present. And she had notified Kevin that his tag had gone flat at 10:30 at the night, and it was registered at his home address, and it was for approximately 30 minutes while Kevin was asleep. So the GPS had registered that the tag had gone off, and what Kevin done was he would always charge the tag when he was asleep, and Kevin's obviously woken up and put the tag straight back on charge. And every time I would see Kevin, Steve, which was daily, I was constantly plugging him into any wall where there was a socket. It would drive him mental. I would constantly get his tag, plug it in the socket, and make sure he was charged. Kevin showed his probation officer that day that his portable charger was slightly faulty. So he's got a portable charger and it attaches onto his main tag. And what this caused was for the portable charger to hang loose, breaking the connection. And when the tag was fitted, it was fitted like that from the start, and it was accepted by the fitters. When the reason why Kevin's tag was fitted 3 days late was because he was told by the fitters that there was a huge shortage in equipment because so many people are being tagged, because of the new scheme. And so this was all that they had. And Kevin's new probation officer had categorically informed Kevin that he would not receive a breach warning for this. It showed he was at home. She could see the clip was loose, and it wouldn't be a concern or a problem. However, his main probation officer decided to issue Kevin with a breach warning for this over 1 month later, Steve. So a month later, Kevin's main probation officer thinks, do you know what? I am going to breach him. And he completely overrided Kevin's new probation officer. And Kevin wasn't aware of this breach or the second exclusion breach until he received a letter from the probation office on the evening of the 15th of June, the day before his recall. So do you know how they should say you're on your final warning?
Yeah.
He got that the day before his recall. So he was given no heads up. He was given nothing. Within his recall meeting, they said that Kevin made no effort to contact probation. So as I've said, for the course of the 8 weeks he was out, Kevin attended every single probation meeting. Kevin's probation officer had stated that, and this was one of the main reasons for Kevin's recall, he stated that Kevin made no attempt to contact probation, and there were 2 occasions where his probation officer had called Kevin, right? And he said Kevin didn't respond, Kevin completely ignored him. The solicitor has provided the parole board with itemised billing from Kevin's phone, where Kevin left a 30-second voicemail on one occasion. And also another occasion where Kevin rang his phone. Do you know where you have proof the phone rang?
Yeah.
So he's completely fabricated the fact that Kevin hasn't called him back. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I mean, throughout the report, there's like so many things that are just off and that don't make sense. And I think the main point with his recall was warnings are urged to be issued as soon as possible by an offender manager's policy. So for him to kind of orchestrate the recall in a strategic manner, where he said, all right, let's put the 2 together and let's add that as his 3rd offence to get him recalled, it's completely unfair.
It beggars belief, what you're saying here. It's just complete mismanagement on their behalf. And, the more that I hear the story, it just sounds as if, as you said right at the top of the program, they've set him up to fail.
It's exactly what they've done. I mean, the duty of a probation officer is to support and provide advice to build a working relationship with the offender, guiding the offender with good communicational skills. And his handling of Kevin was totally lacking any support. Steve, he never ever asked what Kevin was doing, like what good was Kevin doing? One of the things in the report, and it really upset me, Steve, it really hurt my feelings. It said that Kevin likes to associate with criminals to bolster or improve his reputation. Kevin was in bed most nights by 9 o'clock with a book, with a cup of tea and a book. Anyone that speaks to Kevin knows he's really well articulated. He speaks well. He was doing so much work with homeless charities. He was feeding the homeless. He was working with the youth so they wouldn't end up in prison, so they would never have to suffer in the way he would. It's like they want to paint this picture of Kevin, and not a nice picture, a really sinister, horrible one, when it's non-existent.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's there for all to see the good that Kevin's done since he came out, and the fact that he's become, as you say, engrossed not only in his work, but engrossed in just doing the simpler things in life, like spending time at home and reading and just living the quiet life. It's what he wanted to do, and something which he stipulated on more than one occasion when we did our podcast together, and to see recalled is, well, it's devastating for me as somebody who has read his book and feel as if I know his story quite well now. Is there anything that can be done? What is the situation now with Kevin?
So I just wanted to quickly touch upon, do you know where I said his parole officer had explained Kevin was never in touch with probation and he never made any endeavours to call them up or to speak to them? Do you
Yeah.
know what really gets me, Steve? If this is what he believed was true, why would he wait to recall Kevin at his probation meeting? Why would he not, with Kevin being a high risk prisoner, send the police to Kevin's house to recall him then? If Kevin's had absolutely nothing to do with probation, why are you so confident he's going to show up to his meeting to recall him?
Yeah. Good point. Very good
It
point.
it makes no sense. So obviously, given the circumstances, given all the evidence we had, Kevin's solicitor is standing by the fact that Kevin is unlawfully in prison at the minute. And what should have happened is Kevin should have initially had one parole board member answer his solicitor's request for disclosure in relation to Kevin's recall. So Kevin's solicitor had requested some information, to show the coordinates of the GPS tag, proof the GPS tag was actually off. He's asked for all of this information. The parole board completely ignored this request and instead said Kevin will get the disclosure at an oral hearing, which would be in 6 months' time, instead of the 28-day paper hearing, which Kevin should have had, as it was an unlawful recall. So they blatantly disregarded Kevin's solicitor's request for evidential material. The whole concept of a 28-day single parole board member is to make a decision on whether it will be a paper hearing or an oral hearing. And the difference between a paper hearing or an oral hearing is, of course, the time frame. A paper hearing is so much quicker. It can be decided straight away, whereas an oral hearing can take months and months and months. So Kevin's solicitor had sent the request for an executive and immediate release after 28 days of Kevin being recalled on the 14th of July. And the purpose of having a single board parole member is to remedy an unlawful recall. Kevin wasn't even given this opportunity. This has circumvented the 28-day paper hearing as we've passed the date of 28 days and requests for the material have been ignored. And this leaves no option but for Kevin's solicitor to go for a judicial review at the High Court because the system in place has flawed Kevin. It's massively flawed Kevin, Steve, but more importantly, it's flawed itself by refusing to answer the request for disclosure of evidential material by Kevin's solicitor.
Is there anything that we can do to help?
Kevin's got a petition up. He's got a petition, the Fitted Up and Fighting petition on change.org. If people can go and sign it, it will be absolutely great. I think the more that Kevin's story is heard, the more exposure it gets, the better for Kevin. Because the more exposure it gets, people are going to have to start listening. His story does need to be told because this man has served over half his life in prison. He's not done nothing wrong. And what's to say that when he's released again, they can't orchestrate something else to get him straight back in? There's nothing to prevent it. There's absolutely nothing to prevent it at all. I'm starting to almost see a common factor in every report I read. And it's always about Kevin being high risk, high risk, high risk. Again, Steve, they're just going on assumptions. They're not going on facts. During his last recall, there were so many positive entries about Kevin within his parole dossier. I mean, as a result of Kevin being such a good prisoner, he was given the highest security clearance to start a new position within the prison. So Kevin's job enabled him to walk the whole grounds of the prison unattended on his own. So had Kevin's main parole officer taken the time to read and absorb Kevin's parole dossier properly, would a high-risk prisoner be allowed to walk the grounds of the prison unattended? Someone who's so high risk, which is such a concern. If Kevin is so high risk, why was it okay that his tag wasn't fitted for the first 3 days? It wasn't an issue then, was it?
No.
I mean, during his current recall now, he's been given so much responsibility. I mean, on one occasion, he was asked to communicate with all the inmates within his house block as they were on a lockdown, and he needed to convey this information to every single prisoner. And the senior management trusted Kevin for this job. And he genuinely believed that with the rapport that Kevin has with people, of him being such a nice guy, he would be the best person to convey it. There's all of these like great things that Kevin has done within prison, and none of it is accounted for. None of it is mentioned. It's always like negative, negative, negative. If you read like anything his probation officer had to say about Kevin, it would always be negative. It was never discussing his charity work. It was never discussing how well he was getting on with his sons or his relationship. It was just negative, negative, negative. And it's almost like they just want him to fail.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking, really, to think that he's back inside, really, through no fault of his own. And it's head scratching for anybody listening to this to think that, once, you've served your time, no matter how unjust the sentence was, by the way, that you're not really given a chance by the authorities. And if, as it appears, somebody or some people have an agenda, they can clearly do what they want and put you back behind bars and make your life as difficult as possible. And it's something which is as I say, to an ordinary law-abiding citizen like myself, it is head scratching. You've said that the petition is there, which will be great if people could go and sign that. And if you get me the link, I'll stick that down in the description box for people. Obviously, the media, I gather, are going to be quite supportive as well. I believe the Guardian are obviously going to.
I've had numerous journalists contact me rather on Kevin's phone. I've had someone from the New York Times contact me where they're just gobsmacked. They've been following Kevin's story. They're aware of what's happened and they're just shocked. I've had a couple of people from Panorama speak to me in regards to his recall again and just asking about the circumstances around it. I think the number one thing people are concerned about is the fact that the Middlesex addresses, which are categorically not in Hertfordshire, how have they been allowed to be put as breaches? How is it possible for an address in Middlesex to be put down as an address in Hertfordshire? Pinner and Northwood are in Middlesex. They're absolutely nothing to do with Hertfordshire. And the fact that Kevin's solicitor's email was ignored is what is causing kind of fury in people and anger in people. Because had his solicitor's email been answered, Kevin wouldn't be recalled in the first place, Steve, because those breaches would have been rescinded. And I mean, when I speak to Kevin on the phone, one thing that really does upset Kevin is previously it would be a magistrate who decides whether an offender or prisoner is to be recalled. So before it would go to court. And of course, when it does go to court, evidence has to be presented, evidence has to be looked at, and then a decision is made. But now it's down to a parole officer to recall an offender. So as I've said, number one, in 4 months, so in the last 4 months, just to let you know now, let's add some more confusion to the already confused case. So while Kevin's been in prison, he's obviously lodged a massive complaint against his probation manager. Lo and behold, he's been issued a new probation manager. So in 4 months, Kevin's had 4 probation managers. Wow. Is that not ridiculous, Steve?
It's absolutely crazy, Simone. I just don't, as I say, it's head scratching for me. I really can't understand, why they're going to these lengths. I really can't.
I just think for someone like Kevin, all he deserves, and that is the only word I can think of, is stability and, consistency. He deserves a probation officer to build an excellent rapport with him, to know what Kevin wants to do, to be able to nurture that in Kevin, to be able to help him move forward with life, because Kevin has so much to offer. He really does. It's like I speak to Kevin and he radiates so much positivity, even being in there now. If that was any other person who's been in prison for that amount of time and they've gone back in there, you can understand why prisoners become suicidal. You can understand why prisoners are self-harming, turning to drugs, not wanting to continue with their sentence. Anyone who speaks to Kevin knows he just radiates this positivity about him. And I mean, speaking to him, all he wants to do is come home and get on with the work that he's kind of started. He wants to get immersed in his charities. He wants to see his family. He wants to be with his loved ones. He wants to make up for all of the lost time. And it's so unfair. I just wanted to go over some statistics with you, Steve.
Yeah, go for it.
It really shocked me. Kevin and I were reading a report, and the report is an article from NAPO. So NAPO is the trade union and professional association for family, court and probation staff. And the article is called Electronic Tagging, a Flawed System. So NAPO, the probation union, has received over 100 examples of flaws and snags in the nationwide tagging system. And the examples show that often the tagging equipment does not work, and that individuals are recalled to custody unnecessarily. And it just explains how the tagging regime is really rigid and bureaucratic. The electronic tagging of offenders is already a very profitable business for private sector companies. There has been a rise in the number of people tagged either as a condition of a community order or as a freestanding curfew. Currently, the probation caseload is over 300,000, with on average 30,000 to 35,000 people either tagged as a condition of a community penalty or an early release from prison. It currently costs the taxpayer £1,250 for a 90-day tag, rising to £1,500 if the tag sentence is for 128 days. And the annual revenue received by tagging companies is set to rise to over £1 billion. NAPO highlighted a number of complaints within their paper, and these included a delay in fitting the tag, poor communication between the company, the courts and probation, violations not being brought to court, technical failure, and the fact that breaches were not routinely monitored. And what they did was they had a segment of the summary of the main findings. There was endless things, Steve, stating how bad the electronic tagging system was and the flaws within it. There were endless bullet points, but some that I found extremely relevant, and especially to Kevin's case, where there were serious delays after orders were made or individuals released before the tags were fitted. In some instances, the tags were not fitted at all for various reasons, or there were delays between 3 or 4 days and 7 weeks. A number of offenders complained they were constantly rung up in the middle of the night to check whether they were complying with the order. The tagging signal appeared to have failed when they turned over in bed. So on one incident, it was 2 days after the tag had been fitted. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning and Kevin's monitoring box had rung. And it was scary because, you forget you have this monitoring box there. So it rings quite alarmingly and quite loudly. It's not like a normal ring.
Yeah.
Kevin's ran downstairs. He's picked up the phone and he said hello. And the gentleman on the phone had said, hello, is that Kevin Lane? He, of course, said yes. And he said, your tag's showing that you're away from home. So Kevin said, how can I be away from home when I've just answered the monitoring box? And it's at my home. And the gentleman said, the GPS is showing you as away from home. It must be an error. Don't worry about it. And they said goodbye. And this wasn't mentioned to the probation. Probation never mentioned it to Kevin. It was as if it was nothing. Can you see like how serious something like that is?
Of course, it's frightening. I mean, literally, I don't know how anyone can keep their sanity having that kind of situation to live with. You know, not day by day, but minute by minute.
It's like as soon as Kevin had the tag fitted on, he said, Simone, there's going to be issues with it. You'll see. A tag is a good way of kind of controlling a person. Do you know when someone is tagged, you can say they were here or they were not here? Or do you know what I mean? I was speaking to Kevin, and somebody he knew within the prison had a tag, and at one point they said he was somewhere else, and he wasn't. He was at a Shell petrol station. So the Shell petrol station were able to provide video recordings, so CCTV with a time and date stating and proving that this guy was at the petrol station. The probation said, we don't care, your GPS is showing you as elsewhere. It's irrelevant. That CCTV material is completely irrelevant. So nobody is standing a chance.
No, and I mean, Kevin is now, suffering at the hands of this, crazy system that they have, and I've heard similar horror stories over the last few years from different people who've, come out and had to be, at the hands of this system, and it's frightening. It really is, and to hear that Kevin has been failed by this after everything he's been through it's tragic, really.
It's not even, it's where Kevin tried so hard. He really tried hard, Steve. He was every weekend seeing his son. Like, Kevin is a family man.
Yeah.
He's not, they want to make him out like he's some glorified, glamorized gangster. Kevin is nothing like that. I speak to Kevin on the phone. There's some days where his doors open. So, do you know they get open? Kevin doesn't go out. He doesn't get involved with any gossip. He doesn't get involved with any hearsay. He keeps to himself. He's in his cell. He reads like positivity books. He doesn't get involved. So why are they trying to like make him out like he's something he isn't? He has a job. On his last recall, I would speak to him and he would get a job. He gets jobs just to kind of keep his head down, to do his own thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's not in that like prison environment. That's his like way of escaping.
Yeah.
And it's just why are you making him out to be someone he's not? He's such a normal guy. He comes home, he goes to work. After work, he spends time with his family. He cooks dinner. He goes to bed at a reasonable time. For like the 8 weeks he was released, he didn't even go out a single Saturday or Friday night, Steve. He stayed indoors. Do you know, just to be cautious. He was so content with being released. It wasn't like, oh, I'm released. I want to live this like rock and roll lifestyle. It was nothing like that. It was like he was released. He had his head down. He was just getting on with life. And even there, they kind of don't let him live.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So people can sign the petition, which is still positive. I mean, you mentioned the time scale. Obviously the solicitors, I gather, are going to be working behind the scenes to try and get this resolved earlier than 6 months. But apart from signing the petition, is there anything you need us to do, or anything you need us to get out there, or you just want to get the message out, really, Simone?
I want to get the message out. I think the more people that know of Kevin's story as a whole, so when you read Kevin's book, it's going to give you great context as to why he was placed in prison in the first place. For those that don't know, Kevin was in prison for over 20 years for a murder offence. It's a crime he didn't commit, and it's something he's been fighting for over half his life. All Kevin wants to do, Steve, now is get his life back and just be able to live. We've got some, I don't know if you've seen it, people can see it on the Fitted Up and Fighting Back YouTube channel. There's a panorama video Kevin done. So the BBC Panorama done an initial video on his murder conviction, where they showed so much evidence as to why Kevin shouldn't be in prison. It it showed how evidence was fabricated. It showed how the main detective involved was corrupt. And I just think based on that, people need to kind of speak up for Kevin. They need to share his story. But more importantly, we want to work towards getting it in the Court of Appeal, and we're in the right direction there. He has an amazing QC. He has an amazing solicitor who are tirelessly and relentlessly working to get his case heard. And I mean, the day his case is heard and the day his conviction is overturned is the day Kevin will finally get his life back. And it is the day he will finally be able to really live and really breathe.
Yeah, fingers crossed. The website is fittedupandfightingback.co.uk. The link is down below. I've also stuck in the link for the change.org petition, which is up there, which Simone would like you to sign. And yeah, I mean, all I can say really, Simone, is that our heart goes out to you and to Kevin, and that anything we can do on our podcast show to help you, you know where we are. But hopefully, this podcast today will certainly get the message out there about the injustice of all of this and what has exactly gone on, Simone.
Thank you so much, Steve, for speaking to me today. And just for anyone listening, as Steve said, please just share Kevin's story. If you haven't read his book, it's definitely worth reading. I've mentioned this before. What happened to Kevin could happen to anyone. It could happen to your brother, to your son, to your husband, to your partner. Anyone could get fitted up for a crime they didn't commit. And all we want, all Kevin's family want, his friends, his loved ones, they just want him home. They want him home once and for all, Steve. That's it. They want him home, and they want him to never, ever have to return to prison again.
Well, fingers crossed. We're all praying for him, and pass on our best, please, to Kevin when you speak to him next, Simone.
Of course, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve. Bye. Bye.